Last week, we got a new federal government, a minority parliament. Will it lead to a new foreign policy approach for Canada? Let's ask. In the nation's capital, Gary Keller, Vice President, Strategy Corp, former Chief of Staff to John Baird, Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Stephen Harper government. Stephen M. Siderman, Professor and Director of the Canadian Defence and Security Network at Carleton University and the co-host of the Battle Rhythm podcast. And here in our studio, Besba Momaini, Professor of Political Science at the University of Waterloo and a Senior Fellow at CG, the Center for International Governance Innovation. And Janice Stein, the Bellsberg Professor of Conflict Management at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto. Welcome to you all. It's very nice to have you here tonight.
Glad to be here.
And Stephen, reading on your blog, this was your first federal election. You got a chance to vote.
This is true. I became a citizen 2 days after the last election.
How was it voting for the first time?
It was pretty exciting. No line. It was very easy to do. It was much simpler than the typical American ballot. I was so glad to be using a pencil and paper as opposed to anything electronic.
Well, foreign policy seems to be something that we didn't hear very much during the election. Stephen, I'll come to you first. It wasn't a big topic during the election. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think there's two reasons. One is the Liberals avoided it. There was no Munk debate on foreign policy, so that was a lost opportunity. And the second thing is on a lot of the big issues of the day, it's really hard to separate out Trudeau and the Liberals from the other parties because, you know, USMCA, the deal with the United States, was about as best as he could do. Anybody else would have probably gotten the same deal done. China's difficult. Everybody's kind of upset about China. You go across the board with the exception of things like climate change, there's not a lot of distance between the parties on these issues. And so I don't think any party saw it as a real advantage. I was kind of surprised that Trudeau didn't play it up more because he has some experience with it, but then he's vulnerable on the China and India trips, so maybe he just wanted to avoid the entire thing. And to give him some credit, he was right. He won by minimizing foreign policy.
Well, Gary, what do you think? It kind of worked to Trudeau's advantage not talking about foreign policy during the election. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we could have talked about foreign policy in the election. It would have been nice for Prime Minister Trudeau to show up for the Munk debates, but I think the actual main English and French debates kind of let us down, especially the English debate, where foreign policy wasn't even mentioned a single time. I mean, I think it's really up to the debate moderators in that case to say, hey, we totally missed the boat on that one. The other challenge is, quite frankly, with fixed election dates, there wasn't a pressing international issue that was really breaking during the time of the election. I'm not a big fan of fixed election dates, and I think sometimes when there's international issues, whether it's, for example, the new NAFTA, you know, Prime Minister Trudeau may have wanted to go to an election sooner to get a ratification for that. But having fixed election dates kind of prevents that situation from happening. And so during the course of the election, there really wasn't a pressing international issue that directly affected Canada that was being talked about, excuse me.
Well, I mean, it seems as if for the politicians, it didn't work to their advantage to talk about foreign policy. But Besma, what about the voters? Is this something that's not on voters' radar?
Well, in theory, yes, because, I mean, when you look at the polling numbers, that's certainly what the evidence is. When we sort of rank the issue areas that Canadians are most concerned about, that want their politicians to comment on, foreign policy and foreign affairs tend to be really low on the sequence of issues. But I think it's a shame because, in fact, I think really many of the pressing issues that we really want to talk about, from, you know, economics to immigration to climate change, all the rest, they're all global issues, and they really have a lot of connection to a lot of pressing global problems that need to be discussed I think, in a way to really inform the voting public. But unfortunately, it's a supply and demand problem. You know, in many ways, the argument is that the public does not demand it, and so therefore they don't supply it. But also, as both Gary and Steve pointed out, we also don't actually provide it. And so, you know, Canadians get accustomed to this idea that they're not going to get a real debate about these issues, which is, I think, again, a real shame for the voting public.
Well, you wrote an article and you kind of called out journalists on that. In that regard, that we don't really focus on that. What should we do to turn that around?
Yeah, and again, it's a structural problem, right? It's not so much that journalists don't want to. Often they don't have the resources. I mean, obviously journalism and media has been gutted as an industry, and so there isn't enough money, frankly, for a lot of journalists to go out there and to sort of find the international stories that matter to us. That's one aspect of it. But at the same time, we also, I think, back to that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It's assumed that Canadian journalists don't need to talk about what's happening in Chile today, or what's happening in Ecuador, what's happening in Hong Kong, nearly as much as, say, what's happening in their backyard. And so they start to basically focus on the backyard issues. And again, it's hard to pinpoint who or what is really driving this, but it is, I think, an unfortunate, reality that, in fact, our voting public is not well informed.
I think it's been mentioned already about the Munk debate that was canceled because the Prime Minister wouldn't show up. Janice, was that a mistake on his part?
I actually think it was a mistake. The last time, of course, Stephen Harper was the incumbent and Trudeau was the challenger, and he did very well during that debate. And what did he do well on? Not on a foreign policy issue per se. It was on repatriating foreign prisoners and depriving people of citizenship. And that's when he said, a citizen is a citizen is a citizen. He broke through. So this whole notion that we separate foreign policy from domestic policy, that's kind of last century's discussion. Every single issue that matters to Canadian is simultaneously both a domestic issue and a foreign policy issue. What's NAFTA too?
Well, why do you think it declined?
I think when he declined, he was ahead in the polls. The election tightened, and then there was a surge at the end. So I think it was polling that drove it. And I don't agree that it's a lack of demand for foreign policy issues. I think he wouldn't have agreed to any debate with challengers as long as he was ahead in the polls. I think it was a mistake because the NAFTA story, as Gary and Steve just said, is a very good story for this government. I'm not sure anybody else would have gotten as good a deal. They did a, frankly, super job of negotiating that, and they should have talked to Canadians about that, how important our international economic relationships are, how important trade is to the future of this country. And, it's stunning to me, by the way, that the leader of the opposition didn't say you were elected 4 years ago. It's an entirely different world now than when you were elected. Yeah. What's your vision for the future? Here's ours.
Well, I mean, speaking of the future, the election was last week. It feels like it's been a few weeks or months. I don't know. But the Prime Minister was reelected with what people are calling a strong minority government. Gary, you've served in a minority government. How is managing foreign policy different when you have a minority government as opposed to a majority?
Well, where the challenge really lies is actually in the day-to-day management of files and the ability of your foreign minister to actually travel.
Right.
When you have a minority parliament, the whip is on the phone saying, yeah, that nice trip you had planned to the NATO foreign ministers meeting, sorry, it's canceled. You have to be here for a confidence vote on the supplementary estimates B in the middle of December. So that is a reality that people face and actually does affect our foreign policy. And I think about our relationship with ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. When after 2011, when John Baird was the foreign minister and started attending their annual meeting of states and associated states, the comment we had heard was, geez, we haven't seen you guys for a long time. And quite frankly, part of the reason was they held their meetings right at the time every June and July when there were budget votes coming down. And that went back to both Liberals and Conservatives, where their foreign minister just wasn't allowed to travel because of the reality of a very close minority parliament. So it actually does have some impact on the day-to-day operations of what you can do and what you can't do in terms of actually being able to travel. The positive of it is actually, I think, for example, the Liberals have an opportunity here to show some leadership and broaden their approach in terms of trying to include other voices, including on international trips. I know we did that on a few occasions where you bring members from other parties along and kind of show a One Canada approach. And that can kind of have domestic payoff for you politically by saying, look, we're open, we're approachable, we're considering other views in addressing our foreign policy.
And having the ability to work together. I mean, you were very nice about this. I see this on Twitter where people are correcting each other. I said minority government, but it's actually minority parliament.
Correct.
Correct.
It's only a technicality.
It's only a
Don't worry about
technicality.
it. Don't worry about it.
It's good to be called out. Stephen, how would you describe the Liberals' first term in office when it comes to foreign policy?
That's a really good question because they set really lofty expectations. Canada's back. We're going to do more peacekeeping. We're going to make a big difference in the world. And then they got a body blow after their first year when their supposed partner sort of flipped overnight. That the United States went from Obama to Trump, and that meant that Freeland became not really the Minister of Foreign Affairs to the world, but the Minister of Foreign Affairs to the United States, which I think was the correct prioritization, that obviously everything with the United States matters more so than anything else. And they managed that relationship really well. I think one of the things that we forget is that when Trudeau goes to Asia and flails around, which he did on the India trip most notably, is that we get the same kind of things when we see Trudeau travel to Europe. So the European relations have worked out very well over the past several years. We have this trade agreement that's gone on with the EU. So I think that was a success. So I think we have to look at the various issues and look at the world and see where this government did really well and where it did poorly. And I think that this government, like previous governments, doesn't handle Asia particularly well, but we know how we fit into Europe, and so we can move the ball down the field a little bit each time when we work with Europe. So I think overall they did okay, but I think part of the problem was they set off really high expectations. I mean, their first month in office, they had a deliverology summit, and then that set expectations that they're going to deliver a lot. And it turns out if you need a summit like that, maybe you can't deliver.
Well, Janice, how do you think they did?
I think they did really well, as I said, on the one critical file, which is important to every Canadian, which is our relationship with the United States. And it was really tough. And there's books to be written about how they built an all-Canada coalition, nonpartisan, across all the sectors, ran that campaign out of Global Affairs Canada, really in a magnificent way, and we don't give them enough credit for it. But to come to Steve's point, our default reflex is Europe and NATO and the North Atlantic relationship. And that's how we say, well, we should increase our engagement with NATO, we should spend more. We are already in the Pacific century. And the emphasis on Europe is a rear view action. To take one concrete issue where there really are divisions between the parties, China. And Gary, your leader said, we need to get tough on China and show muscle, and he's not alone in saying this. I frankly consider that absolute nonsense. I don't know what he's smoking. We are a small country of 35 million people. We have no leverage with China. China is very important to us. We are insignificant to China. Yes, they have 2 of our citizens hostage as a result of something that really we had no choice in doing. But canola, many, many countries export canola. Everything China buys from us, they can buy from others. Now, why do I make this point? I think Canadians are living in a bubble. We have not had a realistic discussion in this country about the kind of thuggish world in which we live and what we as a country need to focus on in a really steely-eyed way over this next decade to protect our interests. We have a lot of values-based discussions, and we have almost no discussion about what our interests are.
Well, who's going to lead that discussion? You said we live in a thuggish world. Besma, who's going to lead that discussion forward?
Well, ironically, people are looking to us in many ways. I mean, this is the irony of all irony. The fact of the matter is, I totally agree with Janice, the world has changed. It's far more populist, far more nationalistic, far more introverted in some way as well. And so it makes our job more difficult because we are the type of power that wants to work with international partners. We like to work with these forums. It is by virtue of our location being the most powerful country in the world that we tend to nest our activity in these international forums because it protects us. It makes sure that we're not in, the classic example, of course, is in the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The fact that we stuck to our guns and saying we're only going to go in if the United Nations approves this intervention. That allowed us.
Why would we cede our decision-making to the UN, though?
No, and I think our national interest was very much about not going in. Right?
Then we need to say directly to Canadians, it's in our interest, not hide behind the UN, which is just...
Isn't that, not to interrupt, but isn't that difficult? Because we were talking about the importance of the United States, and we kind of seem to follow their lead. How do you distinguish yourself, or how do you even speak back in a situation where you have to be very careful as to not make them upset?
Well, this is exactly it. So we work in the, we like to hide behind the UN, absolutely, right? Our interest was not to go in, and our interest is to behind these multilateral organizations. That's the way we've always operated, and it's classical, I think, international relations theorists would point out. This is the way middle powers navigate themselves in order to survive a world that is increasingly, today especially, where, the commander-in-chief of the United States tweets his foreign policy and often does so not even based on sound judgment of his own Pentagon, State Department, other deep state officials. I mean, I think there is something really odd in the world today. So we need these international organizations, frankly, more so today than even 20 years ago.
Gary, I wanted to get you in because to give you an opportunity to respond to maybe what Janice was saying from before.
Yeah, I actually wanted to jump in on that because whether you agree or not, we should have a tough line with China. I think Janice's point about canola and pork and some other issues, trade-related issues that the Chinese are trying to use as levers against us. We haven't had a conversation in this country about, okay, if the Chinese are using those as levers, what are we trying to do to either open that market back up and call their bluff on those sorts of things, or find other markets for those products. I mean, a lot of those products are based in Western Canada, and we talk about Western alienation in this country, which is now probably higher than it has been in a long time, and the sense of divisiveness in this country. Well, a good start for the Trudeau government, the new Trudeau government, would be to say, okay, what are we doing to try to find markets for those industries? Because it's really hurting those people, and they're saying, what are you doing for it? It kind of reminds me of Pierre Elliott Trudeau Sr., who said, to Western farmers, why should I sell your wheat? Well, I think a new Trudeau government, that's one area where they could try to at least demonstrate some interest in the file by trying to have that conversation. But we didn't have that conversation at all by any of the parties in the election campaign, and I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We have to look at the obstacles we face. There's part of our country right now that is really suffering, and actively pursue alternative markets for those exports that are blocked. But the bigger point here, and Besma, I just want to shade what you said a little differently. Yes, we like to hide behind the United Nations and multilateralism because we think it protects us. But it's actually not a very good strategy to continue to hide. And it actually...
What would you do differently then?
You're open. This is in our national interest. We are not going to go into Iraq. We don't delegate decision-making power to Security Council. We're having a major problem with China. We need to diversify our markets. That is an aggressive stand that our government needs to take, and we need to do that bilaterally with other countries, and multilateralism is not going to solve our problems. Multilateralism works only when there's reasonable respect for the rules of the game. The bad news is nobody, not China, not the United States, not Russia, not Turkey, nobody respects the rules of the game anymore.
I'd push back a little bit. I was just in Germany last week, and it was very clear from their perspective that they too are facing these same kinds of choices. And the reason why we do better in Europe than in Asia is because there are institutions in Europe and not in Asia.
Yeah.
So right now, the thing we can take advantage of is TPP. So yes, we can. China, Turkey, Russia are problems, but we can have an alliance of multilateralism or multilateralists because we all have a common interest in protecting the remnants of the system. So we can work with the Japanese, we can work with Indonesia, we can work with a variety of other countries that have common interests in keeping things open. The challenge of we always want to diversify our markets. Well, the two biggest markets are the United States and China. So good luck with diversifying anytime in the near future. The reality is that we're facing a very tough world, and the rules that exist do benefit us. So we've got to figure out the ways in which we can still defend those rules while looking out for our interests.
And also, too, wouldn't it be fair to say that how other countries see our leader plays a role? Because with the Prime Minister, the recent scandals that he had with SNC-Lavalin, the blackface scandal, would that affect his ability to deal with other countries, Besma?
I mean, definitely. Look, you can't escape it. The Trudeau brand has dropped a little, without a doubt. In fact, I mean, I'm kind of surprised how little it dropped because I think just naming the challenges before him, particularly some of the racial stuff, is really one that should have dropped him to zero. But it is what it is. He does still have some international brand impact. I mean, I was just at the International Monetary Fund meetings, and his name was uttered a lot as a real champion on gender, a real champion on the environment. I mean, there is a lot of still goodwill out there that he's built, which is good for us as Canada. I mean, if it's in our national interest, having us be seen positively throughout the world is a good thing, even though I think many of us can be rightly critical that that brand often, masks a lot of ugliness underneath, right? But I think, yes, look, he has a lot of work to do. And maybe I think the challenge here, back to what Gary mentioned, the fact that he won't be able to go to a lot of these international forums and our officials won't be able to, is probably going to really be visible. I mean, that absence is not going to help us in trying to repair that brand. And again, back to the international environment, guys out there, I mean, the type of governments that are in power today, the kind of right-wing, very xenophobic ideas that are circulating in, what used to be good company is really quite scary. And I think we need more Canadian voices to temper that. But unfortunately, this is the new challenge that he's going to have to face.
Well, Trudeau adopted a feminist foreign policy. Can you explain what that means, Janice?
I'm going to give you my interpretation of what it means, but I speak for me and nobody else. It is to put a gender lens on everything you do in foreign policy. So there's a long-standing tradition. In fact, the Harper government led on women and girls as a key screen for development assistance. There was a real issue on reproductive rights in which they did not lead at all. In fact, they regressed. So there's a line here. So your aid goes through that. And everything you do, what impact is that having on women and girls? And that's the most concrete way that I can express this. Now, where is this really going to matter? And to come back to Steve's points, we have trading agreements right now where there are opportunity to diversify exports. One is in Europe, CETA. Frankly, when you look at the numbers, private sector, it's tiny. So we have a rules-based regime there. The amount of Canadian exports that have increased to Europe since the agreement was signed, almost insignificant. TPP, which is probably the most important agreement, and it's in the Pacific, and it's forward-facing rather than rear-view looking. Asia is more than China, and the Pacific is more than China. There are many agriculture and food importing countries in that part of the world where Canada could really step up. So we have a problem inside this country. We have a problem with and let's not blame government only. We have a problem with our private sector. We have a problem with civil society. We're frankly lazy. We're complacent. We've had it very easy for the last 50 years. We're not used to living in a tough world. And I think there's some very rude shocks awaiting this country if we don't understand how tough that world is out there.
Gary and Stephen, I'll come to you in a second, but I want to get Besma's reaction.
Yeah, I just want to add to the feminist foreign policy, because I think it's really unfortunate they called it that, because in fact, when I talk to civil servants in Ottawa and really dig down on what this approach is, it's not about just gender or, frankly, women. Women and gender are two different things. It's about intersectionality. It's about how do our policies impact the most vulnerable. So in a GBA plus analysis or assessment that's required of all government civil servants, that's gender-based analysis. It's everything from how does this impact racialized communities, Indigenous communities, the poor, really the vulnerable, women and children.
Feminist?
Absolute shame. I think we were following much of the Nordic countries that use that terminology.
But I'm thinking also too, for other countries, some countries might see that as being more about ideology than the right thing to do?
It's more value laden than it should have been, to be quite honest with you, because really, in essence, the GBA Plus is a fantastic tool. It really, when it's applied, I think it's really opening up the eyes of civil servants, of policymakers about how the unintended consequences of our policies can be harmful to some communities. So it's a good tool, but I agree. I think calling it a feminist foreign policy was really unfortunate.
And Gary, the person heading up the foreign affairs portfolio is Minister Chrystia Freeland. How do you think she's done?
Well, look, I think obviously on the NAFTA file, where she was very heavily engaged, I think she was part of the reason why we got a deal. I think David McNaughton, our ambassador in Washington, also has to take a lot of the credit there. And they did, after a very rough start where the government was completely unprepared for a Trump presidency. It took them some time to try to find their feet, but they did try to find their feet, and they did so eventually to the point we are now on the new NAFTA, and we'll see where it goes in terms of ratification because it's caught up in all sorts of other politics in the States right now. But on other issues, I talk to people at Global Affairs in the very senior roles, and their response is, we just don't know what Chrystia Freeland's priorities are. I mean, on a sort of multilateral or a bilateral basis, we haven't seen her. We don't know what they are. On a lot of issues, it doesn't seem like she's been very present. She was very, very quiet, certainly over the last 6 months, over the SNC-Lavalin issue, and on sort of day-to-day operations of Global Affairs and our position on stuff. She seems to be pretty quiet on things. So it remains to be seen whether or not she succeeds as foreign minister. They may say they need her in another role. I've heard her mooted as a possible minister of a supernatural resources and environment ministry, with her being born in Alberta, with her sort of carrying the Alberta portfolio, which is a bit strange given she represents University of Rosedale in the center of Toronto. But, I think on some of these like more intractable issues that require real day-to-day function, I don't think a lot of people could tell you what her or the government's priorities are.
Okay, I'll just get Janice really quickly, and I'll come to you, Stephen.
Yeah, that's not fair, Gary. When there was an issue around SNC and Tony Wilson-Raybould, it was a really tough moment for virtually any of the women let's be honest, for any of the women in the cabinet to be front and center.
Oh, it was tough. It was definitely tough on Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott. They sure got the back end of the Prime Minister's hand on that one.
No, but that's not the reason why it was tough. So
why was it tough?
It was tough because you're caught in the middle of an open debate, and anything you do is going to be interpreted as siding on one side or the other. So virtually all the women ministers actually had a very rough spring once it's exploded. I think she's made her priorities quite clear. The issue is whether all Canadians agree, but she, if you look at where she's put most time and energy after NAFTA, it's frankly been on human rights issues. Mm-hmm. Those are the issues that are closest to her heart. She has enormous interest in Ukraine. She has very strong views on Russia. She led on Venezuela. Which she
but
sees...
on Ukraine and Russia, what is the difference than the Harper foreign policy? If anything, the Harper foreign policy was just as strong.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean
that's not a real differentiation of position.
Yeah, but that's not what we asked. We said, does she have priorities? Yes, she does. Those are one, whether they're differentiated or not. Latin America has been a real priority for her, and she took a leading role. Which Canada's actually not had in Venezuela. So the argument in the country is not that she doesn't have priorities. It's rather, are our economic interests getting the kind of attention that they need at this particular moment?
Well, we'll find out in November once the Prime Minister fixes his caucus. Right. Stephen, in a minority parliament, how much clout do the opposition parties have on foreign policy?
They have surprisingly little. One of the challenges and one of the interesting things that's going to happen is to see whether Trudeau can manipulate the Parliament as well as Harper did.
You used the word manipulate.
Manipulate, absolutely. That my colleague Phil Lagasse has a great line about how Harper was able to launder responsibility through the Parliament. Trudeau's going to need to get support for things, but once these parties support him on an issue, well, like in the past when Harper was able to get support for the Afghanistan war from the Liberals, then the Liberals can't really argue about it. And Harper, every time that he was questioned about it, said, it's not me, it's Parliament. Parliament's will is to do this, that, the other thing. And so it was no longer really being held to account for what was going on in Afghanistan. So it really depends on how clever Trudeau is. And he's got a playbook that was written by his predecessor that he can pick and choose which opposition party he wants to tie in on a particular issue. And the key thing right now is I don't think any of the other opposition party wants an election, and so you can hold that over them. You can always threaten, well, if you want to push this to the wall, let's have another election. And I don't think the NDP is ready for another election, and certainly the Conservatives are not ready for another election. And so that gives them at least 6 months of running room, if not more than that.
Well, do you see the Greens and the NDP pushing the Liberals more to the left?
I think on some issues, I mean, there will be some room to do some climate change kind of stuff internationally, but then again, that presses against the whole problems with the West, or at least I should say Alberta in Canada. So I think it's going to be very difficult to make a lot of progress in that file for the simple thing that pipelines dominate politics in Canada in a way that this American just doesn't understand sometimes. But I think on other issues, the human rights stuff, on disarmament, on those values issues, I think that they'll be easily able to get the Greens and the NDP to support them on those things. And when it comes to more kinetic, more harder stuff, staying in Ukraine, staying in NATO, staying in Iraq, they can look to the Conservatives to support them on that. So it's going to be an a la carte thing where they choose which party depending on which issue calls for it. So they don't have to line up with one party for the next 4 years. It's going to be as each issue arises.
Well, we've mentioned Venezuela, but I wanted to shift gears and discuss some of the world's hotspots. Let's start with Turkey's recent incursion in Syria. Besma, do you see a role for Canada there?
Not quite, not really. Certainly we've had a legacy there in the sense that we've supported the Kurdish Peshmerga. Of course, that's on the Iraq side, not on the Syria side. But I think at this point, frankly, we're out of the game. When we pulled out our 6 planes and the rest of it, we really kind of, I think, succumbed to others. And certainly, this is a really troubled area to sort of deal with. There's enough cooks in the kitchen, to be honest with you. The last thing that I think the world needs is us involved. But the one issue that, of course, is on top of mind is about the foreign fighters, what to do with them. And that's something where we need to lead. I think
about them coming back home.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a controversial issue, and nobody wants to see these people come back. I mean, truly and utterly. But the reality is, better held up here in a place where we can monitor them, where some of them may be imprisoned, where they may go on trial, than frankly on the loose in parts of northern Syria where there could be a resurgence of ISIS, which I think is really the fear. And we need to be serious about it. I don't like to agree with Donald Trump, but he's right. Countries need to take back their citizens, need to start thinking about how to prosecute them, and stop, frankly, putting their heads in the sand and hoping this will go away, because it's not going to go away, and it's going to rear its ugly head. And I think we've already heard about 100 or so that have been, escaped prisons that were being monitored by the Syrian Democratic Forces. This is a Kurdish militia, basically. That cannot be sustained. It needs to be addressed.
Gary, I'll ask you the same question.
Yeah, I think on Syria/Turkey, I think obviously Canada can play a humanitarian role, whether it's foreign aid or whether it's aid around education, things like that. But yes, we do have to have a discussion and a conversation in this country about foreign fighters, and not just the fighters, but their wives and their children, and how to prosecute them best. Ignoring the issue is not going to make it go away, and it is a conversation worth having. And I think that one of the things that a new minority government could do, and probably with support from the Conservatives, is coming forward with a standard in law that allows these people to be persecuted. Prosecuted. Thank you very much. Prosecuted very much based on the fact that they left Canada with a clear intent to do these things. And that's one aspect of it. And of course, the other side is purely the women and children, and dealing with that issue as well, because especially children, very sad tale of children born into this situation where they didn't ask for this, and their lives will be, haunted by this for the rest of their lives, frankly.
And I think this goes back to what you were saying, Janice, about how we've kind of been in a bubble and being protected. What role do you see for Canada there?
Well, Canada has no role. It's not there. It has no leverage. That's what I mean by being honest with ourselves. So we cannot influence events on the ground in any way. So we need to focus on what is the one issue, which is the foreign fighters. There are Canadians there. We could potentially face a catastrophe if the camps, which hold about 10,000 fighters, and the neighboring camp, which holds women and children, break down. If security breaks down, that is a real possibility, and people flood into neighboring Iraq and across borders, reorganize, and we could have a resurgence, because some of these are hardened fighters who've been arrested, are natural leaders. So I think we do have to have a very serious conversation in this country. who we take back, how we take them back. You know, the arguments I hear when I speak to our officials are always, well, it's expensive for us. It's very expensive to keep somebody in a Canadian jail. Yes, it is. That's correct. That's where we need to be hard-headed. What do we need to do here with respect to our own interests and our own responsibilities?
And face this situation
And
head
face
on.
this situation honestly, exactly. So I'm actually hoping that a minority parliament will make it easier for the government to do that. In a funny way, you asked a question. I don't know what Gary thinks about this. I actually think there's opportunities to be more creative on foreign policy in a minority parliament.
In what ways?
Because you need to bring other parties along with you. And given that this is a strong minority, as Steve says, one day you partner with the Conservatives on issues where those two agree. The next day you partner with the Greens and the NDP, but you're never wearing the issue alone. And that actually provides more running room for a really skilled leader in a minority
And
parliament.
more engagement, I suppose. Stephen, I'll let you have the last word.
I'd say that in Middle East, one of the strange things about the last election was that the Conservatives had Iran and Israel as their top 5 foreign policy priorities. We have to remember that Canada is not a Middle Eastern country, that our priorities are a little closer to home, and as we talked about earlier, we have much more interest at stake in Asia. And so I think that the more time we spend trying to figure out how to manage Turkey is wasted effort when we should be focusing more on our relations with those countries around China, for instance.
I think that's all the time we have for tonight. I wish we had more time. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to the agenda and
Pleasure.
helping us make some sense of this complex issue. Thank you very much.
Great to be with you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.